All right, class. We're going to go ahead and finish up V for Vendetta, volumes 9 and 10. So let's go ahead and get going. I will share my screen with you. There it is. All right. Oh, and there's the abyss. Okay. Volume 9. Here we go. So we have the cover, this disheveled character. You might not recognize him in that state, but that is Inspector Finch. A bit of foreshadowing here. This is the cloak of V, so we can see that he's like pointing a gun at V and screaming for his life. And then we have the Lark Hill resettlement camp sign. And you remember Inspector Finch had been dropped off at the Lark Hill resettlement camp, and we weren't quite sure what he was up to. But what he explains here is that his intention is to come here to try to get in the mind of the terrorist and figure out what it is that makes him tick, because he's trying to beat V, but he feels like in order to beat V, he has to know how he's thinking so he can predict his next move. But V doesn't think like other people, and so he's got to figure out a way to really get in that headspace. One of the things that he has chosen to do, and this is a very controversial aspect of this volume, is he's chosen to take this drug here as a way of sort of breaking him out of his own perception and opening him up to the possibility of V's perception. This is the drug LSD or acid that he's got here. And if you know anything about that, in the 60s, there was a big wave of that, and there was a lot of controversy, a lot of people who kind of went off the rails a little bit because it's very, very powerful and it can really mess with your mind under the wrong circumstances. And I would say a concentration camp is pretty high on the list of wrong circumstances. But in any case, he doesn't even know like how much he's supposed to take, and he just eats a bunch of it. And then he goes into the concentration camp and is walking around like, geez, why did I even come here? Like, oh, here are the ovens, people ovens. Kind of not. It seems like he's very distant from the reality of what he's looking at. Like he's looking at it like, oh, look, the ovens. I shouldn't have come here. And then he turns around and he sees these like quartered bodies hanging on the barbed wire, and then it starts to get a little real for him. He realizes, oh my God, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. What am I going to do? He has this like sense of vertigo where he's trying to get back, but he looks down the way and it seems so far. And then he just hears like this humming in his head, and all of a sudden he's standing there with this prison suit on. So I would say it's getting pretty real for Inspector Finch pretty quick. This is one of the reasons why I like the transformation of this character so much more in the graphic novel, because in the film they don't include any of this. He just kind of puts it together, and being a man of moral conscience, he figures out the right thing to do. But in this case, I think it really explains, like somebody who was this ensconced in the party and the sort of politics of the status quo, it wouldn't be very easy for them to empathize with a person, or sympathize rather. I always forget those. I mix those two up. To try to like get in their head and understand how they think. It wouldn't be very easy because he would be very much indoctrinated by the system that he is in. But this allows him to kind of get out of that, although it's a really, really heavy way to do it. And he's speaking to, first he sees the minorities that were exterminated by the party, and they all come up and they hug him and kiss him. And he like remembers that he actually had like positive relationships with these people, and like he misses them. And he watches as they disappear into this wall, and he's like, no, please, I'm sorry, I love you, and they disappear. So we already see his conscience, and that's one of the redeeming qualities about Finch, is that he does have a conscience. And so then he's sobbing, and he looks over and he sees the silhouette in the house, and he goes in, and it's Delia. So he has this attempt to try to reconcile with Delia, but then all the other party officials come in, and he sees Delia kissing the ring of the Bishop Lilliman. And so that has to do with like kind of, yeah, you can feel bad all you want, man, but you kiss the ring of power. You and your girlfriend, you guys really bought into this evil stuff, and you did so without really questioning it at the time. So there's only so much forgiveness, I think, that would really justify any of this. Like, just feeling bad is not enough, right? Because Delia felt bad, but it was already too late. So then they take him away and they shove him into room 5. Now, if you remember, room 5 is where they put V, and is where he started making all of those explosives and things with the gardening supplies. And so here he sees the piles of ammonia on the floor, and he's looking at it. And he's like, man, he was crazy. Like, but there has to be an answer here. And then he says, why can't I? I look at this mad pattern, but where are the answers? Who imprisoned me here? Who keeps me here? Who can release me? Who's controlling and constraining my life except me? And then the wall blows open, and he goes, I'm free. And he runs up the hill, free. And then he's like tearing off his clothes, like he's running naked, basically. And he's saying, vaulting, veering, vomiting up the values that victimize me. So you see all the V's. He keeps bringing in these V's. It's meant to show that he's like having the same transformative experience that V did in the cell. And when he gets to the top here, he says, this is in French, but it's the way, the truth, and the life, which is a quote from the Bible. And when he's standing up at the top of the hill, this structure that's surrounding him is Stonehenge. So this is a pretty intense scene here, like this just transformation of the inspector into, and it shows you the dangers of what he was trying to do. What if in understanding V, you come to understand the ways in which he's right, and the ways in which he views reality that are like more real than what you believed. And that's kind of, I think, the danger. So what does this mean for Inspector Finch? Has he become sympathetic to the terrorist, or is he still in alignment with the party some way? It's hard to say. But in any case, I think that's a very interesting, albeit controversial scene. It is important to note that he does spend the rest of the duration of the comic book like sort of wandering around in a confused, like scrambled state. So I don't think it's necessarily glorifying his choice to do this drug, but in any case, it's interesting that they have chosen that as the catalyst. So then we're back in the Shadow Gallery. We're talking to Evie, who has kind of grown into this new person and accepted her fate, and is trying to understand what V is talking about now and what he's after. And they are talking about preserving music and preserving culture, and he takes her in to show her all the televisions that he uses. So this reminds me of the Batman scene where he's got those sonic TV monitors that he uses and Morgan Freeman doesn't approve. And then he's talking about, he does mention again the psychedelic stuff, and he says use them wisely if at all. This novel's embracing of that is a very controversial thing, because as you know, those are very illegal and very dangerous. So this is kind of a radical text. It really is. And I don't know if the ideal that it constructs is really attainable. That's the whole problem. I think it is beautiful in some of its messaging, but I think in the end of the day, it's like, is this even really feasible? Who knows? He talks about the flowers again, and the rose from Mr. Susan, but he says he's cultivated a most special rose for Inspector Susan. So who knows what that is? We find out later what he's talking about, but it's very like ambiguous. And then they go back down the stairs, and he kind of lets her know about his plan to use this train full of explosives to some kind of nefarious mean, as like a Viking funeral or a funeral barge. And it's kind of a bit of foreshadowing here, because V is acting very strange, and he's like dodging her questions. And he goes up the stairs, and he's staring at this sign that says "Farewell, my lovely." So there's a little bit of foreshadowing there that V doesn't believe he's going to survive the last act, and maybe that's his intention. We know that he's a very tortured character, and maybe once he feels like the mission is complete, he no longer has to do it anymore. It's kind of sad. But here we have the inspector sitting in the road that Finch is walking down, and then Almond's wife with the gun under her pillow, and then we see just all these parallels. And chapter 5 is vector. So like a vector is like things coming together, like paths starting to cross. So now we see all of these parallel storylines that have been sort of built up separately are now coming to converge through this chapter. It's very interesting. Here we are with these two here. Remember the woman who is vying for power through the use of her husband, and she's like forcing him to eat this candy and being really abusive. She whacks him with a clipboard. And she's not a very nice figure, but I think their whole thing is they're the people who are trying to they're trying to be on top of the dog heap once it's over with, right? Then we have Mr. Creedy, and Mr. Creedy's talking about keeping the peace and the coup. They're going to overthrow the leader. They realize that the leader's brain is like scrambled. He's not well, so they're trying to figure out how to end up with themselves on top. So they're setting up this conflict between this woman and Creedy. I can't remember her name. I apologize. I should know it, but so here we have Almond's wife getting ready again, and then this whole thing about how this woman is like having an affair and like just using her husband, and V's watching all of it, right? It's very voyeuristic and kind of strange. But he's sort of made to seem like omnipotent, like he knows everything, and he's making these people do what they do because of his own devices, which is a really weird thing to think about. We come back into the leader. We see his mind is broken. He's like babbling over this computer. I forgive you. I forgive you. And then Inspector Finch walks back in. And as he's walking down the street, he looks down and he sees that the sign makes a V that's his symbol. And he's like, of course, of course. And he goes down into the Victory train station. And we find out basically that the Shadow Gallery is underground in the train station, which we already knew from them showing the train station before. But so V is being set up to be encountered by Inspector Finch, who has gone through this transformative experience, but like we don't really know what that means. Does that mean that he's sympathetic to V and that he wants to try to like help the cause, or does it mean that he's still on the side of the party, but he knows enough now to defeat him? It's hard to say. Okay, so then back here we have Chancellor Susan, and he's like, I got to get a handle on this thing. I've got to make them see that I'm still in control, and should I wave back? Must it look rehearsed, as spontaneous? He's trying to figure out how to relate to people because this computer was the only thing he could relate to, and now it's gone. So he's like, well, maybe I can get power through these people, but he's so distant, and his ability to relate to the people is totally gone. So then the inspector comes back in, he hears this like music playing, and he goes up and he sees this. Again, it's one of V's dummies. He's playing the guitar, and he says, so, Mr. Finch, finally we meet. Again, indicating that V not only wants Inspector Finch to be here, but like I think he thinks Inspector Finch should be the one to make the decision for what happens to him. And remember the domino scene, that's very important. Okay, so then we have Almond's widow walking through the crowd. She's walking up. The chancellor wants to get closer. He doesn't even remember her. When he goes to hold out his hand, he does not even remember that this is the woman who was married to his former head of the Fingermen, whose now life is destroyed because her husband died in the line of duty, and he doesn't even recognize her. And so she pulls out the gun, and she's the rose that V was cultivating for the chancellor. And so she pulls the trigger right at the same time as V and Finch are kind of having. I love the parallels. The parallels. That's one of the cool things about graphic novels. You can juxtapose things visually in a way that other mediums really don't allow for. Okay. So we see Inspector Finch shoots. V goes for the knife. They get up, and he has this thing about like, there, did you think you were going to kill me? There's no flesh or blood within this cloak to kill. There's only an idea, and ideas are bulletproof. Farewell. That's a great line, right? And then he walks away. Finch was stabbed. He pulls out the knife, but then he sees, oh, wait, I did shoot him. I did kill him. I killed you, you monster. I killed you. And he's like, he's definitely not the same guy. Like, look at this fella. He's completely whacked. And then we have the flowers in the end there. So that's the end of Volume 9. Now let's go to Volume 10, final volume, wrapping up the story. All right, we have this train station here. Uh, okay, then there's the realization that uh, so that the inspector has been killed, and they're trying to get to the bottom of it. Not the inspector, the chancellor. And Inspector Finch comes in. He says, "Codename V, he's dead." Uh, and he's like, "Do you really think the terrorist is dead?" Finch is half out of his mind on drugs, but he's still a boring, reliable little man. He probably did it. And then, so there's a parcel. The question is, what next? The assassination taken us all by surprise. By now, this country's a political vacuum. Nobody's in charge, right? And then she's like, "Oh, of course, Creedy thinks he is, but I'm the one that's gonna get control." So now we see like the basically the vultures circling the corpse and who's going to get to eat first. Then back to Inspector Finch. Um, and he basically says that V could have killed him, but he didn't. So it's like he chose to die. And that freaks him out even more. Like you can see he's like, man, did he set that whole thing up? Like here I am thinking I killed him, but like, was that his will all along? And he does kind of have this omnipotence, you know? Um, So, and when they ask Inspector Finch where it all happened, he lies to them. He says, "I was on drugs. Maybe it didn't happen." So he basically is like protecting the shadow gallery and like what's going on there because I think he realizes that it's not over. And again, his loyalties are kind of shaken. Like, who's he for? Right? He's on the fence. He's not sure. Okay. So now we have this thing where Conrad sees the footage of his wife and like it drives him to tears. And then we have the announcement that the terrorist has been killed. Everything is under control. Go back to bed. We assume he is dead. We repeat, he is dead. And we still see all of this illegal activity going on. And it says that the insurrection is over, but clearly it's not. Like everyone's still in a state of like chaos. Um, and everyone's kind of looking around like, is he really dead? Is he really dead? Does this even matter that he's dead? Isn't the damage already done? Evie comes back to the shadow gallery and she says, "Where have you been?" She's all like chiding him, and then he falls over on the stairs and we see his face. And then so obviously V is dying, and he like talks to her and he's like, "You have to figure out who I really am." And he asks her to give him a Viking funeral. So a Viking funeral is they put you in a boat with a bunch of like tinder and logs and stuff, and they set the boat on fire with a flaming arrow. So he wants to be in like a burning barge or boat. I think it's obvious that that's the train car. So she's sitting here and like sort of following him, or no, let's see. He's on the floor and she like follows the blood and then is like talking to him, but it's unclear if she's like, I think she's imagining this conversation, like he's already really dead. And she's just kind of walking around the shadow gallery trying to put together the conversations they were having and figure out what it is he wanted her to do. And she's trying to figure out like, what's the point of all of it? And like, who are you? And are you even really dead? And like, there's that whole thing about him being an idea. So how can you kill an idea? So is he really dead? And she starts to take off the mask. And she's like imagining this though. This is a weird sequence because it's like she's not really reliable here. We don't know if this is actually happening, and she's like hallucinating, or if this is all in her imagination. But she takes off the mask, and first I think this is her mother, or maybe it's her father. It's one of her parents. Then she takes off the mask, and it's Gordon. No, that's not it. Then she takes off the mask, and that's her father. So I guess this must be her mother up here. No, it's not my father. You were not my father. And then she takes off the mask and she realizes, it's me. I am who you are. You are me and I am you. And now we remember the parallel where she comes out of the being tortured and standing in the rain, and it's a parallel to him in the fire. So it's really interesting because it's like V is the aspect of destruction, and then Evie is supposed to be the one that's the aspect of creation. She creates from the rubble. I think it's important that it's a female character that does that, because that's generally a female trope in a mythological sense. But we see that like this is who she's supposed to become. She is supposed to take up the mantle and be V herself. And we see that smile, that like vaudeville smile that he supposedly had. And then we see her with the mask on, right? And then back to reality. Oh no, there's not that riots aren't over yet, right? Inspector Finch is still kind of scrambled, and he's like basically like I'm gone, I'm out, man. This is all over. They're dividing the carcass, and like I thought following orders would work, but it won't. I'm done. And so he has changed. He did what he had to do. He destroyed the aspect of destruction so that the society could be rebuilt, but he's no longer the same person, and he no longer believes in the hierarchy. So maybe he's bought into it, and it's really interesting because he was like ensconced in the party. He was one of them, and he was able to come to an understanding as a consequence of the stuff he went through during this investigation. I think he's a great character, Inspector Finch. He's pretty good in the film as well. If you watch the film, it's pretty solid how they do him. But I think he's a great character just because he's so complicated. Okay, back to these criminal fellows here and the vying for power, and they have a conflict, and they're like beating each other up and trying to see who gets on top of the dog pile. Then in comes the woman, and she sees that he's died, right? And so it's like, you ruined it all. Wait, no, she killed Conrad, right? And then he killed Conrad, so it's like you destroyed my plan because Conrad was her agency. She had control of. No, this is Conrad. Sorry. He killed the other gentleman and like ruined his own chances of. So I think he's like bleeding out here, and so she's like, here, watch yourself dying. Like it's really sick. Um, but she's mad because her agency was through him, and without him, uh, she can't do what she was supposed to do. But he was reacting out of anger because of what he saw that she recorded. And so it's like she kind of ruined herself. But without the male agency, she feels like she can't get on top of the pile. And like, so she has to try to find someone else to try to help her if she's going to get to where she wants to be. And then we have this whole bit about everyone standing outside, and then boom, V's at the top of the thing. He's not really dead. Good evening, London. Here I am. Reports of my death were exaggerated. That is a Mark Twain quote, which I love. The literary references in these texts, they're really great. Mark Twain said, rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated because he was like reported dead incorrectly by a newspaper one time, which that's actually really funny. Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated, meaning I'm not dead, which is it's kind of a funny, he was famous for his wit in that way. But then he basically offers them a choice. He's like, it's on you. Do you want to return to your chains and the way things were before, or do you want to make the conscious decision that the world is going to be different? And it's hard to say what they will pick. Then here is the Viking funeral, right? Valhalla is the name of like Viking heaven. You get there by death in battle, which he did. So he would be fit for Valhalla to be taken there by the Valkyries, who are like the angels. So maybe she's playing the Valkyrie in this case. She lays him down in the train car, and basically the plan is that I think it's going to blow up Downing Street? Is that what it is? Hang on. Twixt Whitehall and St. James. I think it's Downing Street, which is like which is where the Prime Minister is. It's not as iconic as the White House, but the British have a building called 10 Downing Street that's like their White House, basically. So that's what they destroy. And it's like the final symbolic destruction of the power structure. And then she basically is coming to terms with her role as V, and she lives in the Shadow Gallery now. So V is still there, but now it's Evie, right? It's a different figure. It's like the creation aspect instead of the destruction aspect. And then we end with Inspector Finch walking through the park, and here's the woman trying to find someone else to help her vie for power, and like she can't. She's totally powerless without her boyfriend or husband or whoever that is. And then so he just kind of, she's like, oh, Finch, you could help me. You could be the one. And he's like, I don't want any part of it, lady. See you later. And then this is how it ends. It ends with Inspector Finch walking into the shadow and then the faces of all the characters. So again, in a similar way to Fight Club, we don't really have any closure here. I think it's meant to be open-ended. What do the people choose? Do they choose the new future without any hierarchies? Or do they simply rebuild a hierarchy out of the ashes of the old one and go back to the way they were before? It really comes down to whether or not you view things in an idealistic way. Is it really a matter of our ideas that make us participate in a system that subjugates us in a way, or is it something that we just naturally do and something that we will always do? It's kind of left open-ended, and I like that because it doesn't really give you any answers. It does the morality of all of these characters is really obscure. V's not really all great. Evie's not really all great. The party has members with a conscience, but is it enough? So it's all about basically your own interpretation of the ideal and whether or not it is attainable and whether or not it would be attained. And they don't give you any closure on that. You kind of want it, and the film really does give you that closure. It kind of gives you a much more positive note to end on. But in this one, it's like, nah, it really is up to you. It's up to you. How do you want to live going forward? And one of the problems is everyone going to agree to that vision? Is everyone going to agree to the absence of the previous hierarchy? And how would we prevent somebody from just coming along and creating a new one? So I like this text. I like to read this text alongside Fight Club, particularly because they kind of deal with the same subject matter, but they deal with it in very different ways. I think this text is much more celebratory of the ideal or of idealism. And then Fight Club just has this kind of cynical realism to it all that's like none of this is really going to come, nothing good is going to come of it. But it is interesting to think about because we live in a time of reasonable amount of social upheaval. It's not like we're in a apocalyptic scenario or anything, not quite yet, but there is a lot of political upheaval in recent years and people who seem to want to change everything and tear down the old way and put in a new way. And this happens a lot through history, and it always kind of has a really bittersweet ending. If you look at all the revolutions of the past, they all kind of end in a new establishment of a similar hierarchy. And it's kind of depressing. This is what Orwell was on about when he wrote 1984. It's like, is there really a way to get around this? Is there really a way that we could all come to some kind of understanding where we didn't have to live this way anymore? It's up to you, right? I think that's the whole point. So I won't ramble on that much anymore. I do appreciate you guys reading this text. I hope you enjoyed it. I try to pick things that I think students will enjoy. If you didn't, please understand it was my intention to try to make it as interesting as possible. There will be some other things that we read that maybe are more resonant with you, but hopefully this wasn't too bad. And if you have any questions about the text, if you intend to write on the text and you have any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Have a lovely week.